Good evening and welcome to another Facebook Live session brought to you by the team at Bright Heart Education with education expert John Salmon M.Ed. Hi John, thank you very much for making time for us again this evening to discuss some of the changes that have been taking place in education and schools, particularly at the moment due to COVID-19.
Hello, Jackie. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
John, we are glad to have you. You are an educator, you're a father. What is your opinion on the current state of education in the UK, and especially regarding the extension to keep students out of school because of the pandemic?
Yes, the extended period of time out of school has undeniably had a negative impact on all students, or the majority of students, mostly due to the lack of face-to-face learning time, which has resulted in a significant loss of learning, of course, in terms of covering the curriculum, but also in terms of study skills, social skills, mental health, as has been pointed out by many professionals. And that is regardless of the attempts that have been made to replicate the school environment through remote means. Now, as far as our experience with our existing clients and some new clients who have been calling us to tell us a little bit about what's going on, we have heard stories that pertain to the fact that workloads have been impossible to meet for many of the students. And this is not necessarily because they have so much work that they cannot do it, not in all cases, in some cases, but mostly due to the lack of support from a trained teacher. Parents are doing what they can to make up for that, but they're not trained teachers, and students have consequently lacked motivation. They don't find that there's enough of a reward in place. They have realized, of course, that there's not as much accountability on the part of the schools, since they've relaxed maybe their need for compliance with the workloads a little bit, and students have noticed that, students of all ages. Mostly it's been disengagement, and parents have been trying to tackle it just as much as they can. But I can tell you for sure that having been a teacher, having been an educational administrator, that nothing can really substitute for a passionate, well-trained teacher who can really foster a love for learning in his or her pupils. Now, if we look at the figures, the impact of school closures has been quite significant. If we look at, for example, a survey conducted in May by the National Foundation for Educational Research, we see that the vast majority of teachers, 90% in fact, have said that their pupils are doing much less work than they would normally do at this time of year. So 90% is already significant enough, but half of the pupils have shown to have parents, only half or slightly over half of pupils' parents have shown that they have been engaged with their children's home learning, and mostly in deprived areas, we have noticed that the level of engagement has been less significant than in other areas of the country. Up to a quarter of children, especially in deprived areas, have had limited or no access to technology, which of course has made the task almost impossible. And especially the children who are vulnerable or children with SEN have been affected the most, of course. There are also figures that suggest that children are doing an average of 2.5 hours of schoolwork a day, whereas the average used to be 6 to 7 hours while they were at school. So that has had an impact, of course, a great impact on loss of learning. And they figure also that 2 million children roughly are doing no schoolwork at all. So the impact has been quite severe for the country.
John, you raise quite a few very pertinent points there about parents doing the best that they can, but being no substitute for trained teachers, significant loss of learning. These are serious issues at hand, and you yourself, being in the profession, obviously that lends a lot of weight to this argument. But you're not the only professional that's expressed concern. I know that we've seen an open letter which was shared here on Bright Heart Education social media channels to the Secretary of Education, Gavin Williams, from prominent UK medical professionals, also calling for a return to school. What are some of the reasons that they cited, or other reasons, additional things that were mentioned in favor of returning to school with children?
Of course, in a nutshell, they are, of course, the loss of learning, that being the most crucial, but also an increase in the attainment gap. The fact that due to social interaction, the lack of social interaction, the lockdown has been really detrimental for children's mental health. And the argument is that it's possible to have children go back to school, mainly because evidence suggests, the science suggests, that children do not transmit COVID-19 at the same high rate as adults do. Now, if you look into it a little further, this letter has suggested, and it comes from medical professionals in the UK, from some of the top universities in the UK, suggests that there have been feelings of entrapment, loneliness and hopelessness, and these have led to thoughts of self-harm amongst children. They have pointed out that suicide is already the leading cause of death in those aged 5 to 19 in England. This is according to this impact on mental health is according to a survey from Oxford University, by the way. But of course, the impact, aside from the mental health, the impact on learning has been devastating, and the attainment gap has widened even more. Those mostly affected have been vulnerable children and those with SEN, as we were pointing out a little earlier. They have argued that in other countries like Greece, and I think they mentioned Denmark has been mentioned very frequently, they have been able to reopen schools, and that has not resulted in a second wave of coronavirus, due to the fact that children don't play a significant role in terms of transmission. And all these arguments put together have led many professionals to ask the government to ensure a return to school and, of course, safe conditions.
Thank you for that feedback. I know that there's also been a lot of polarization around government's call to keep children at home for longer. What do you believe can be done to allay parents' fears around both their children falling behind with their schooling as well as with contracting the virus?
Polarization is understandable. When the government talked about reopening schools in June, they did it with the idea that they could somewhat mitigate that loss of learning, and that is naturally a good rationale. But it's also understandable that there was an outrage coming from the teacher unions, who were concerned about health risks, parents who didn't want to send their children back to school for the same reason. They were concerned about health risks, and safety was meant to be held first. We have to ask ourselves what the government's priorities are, of course, when opening up the economy and social sectors in the country. Education should always be one of the priorities in that regard. This is my opinion, of course. There is, of course, the fact that children don't pose as much of a risk when it comes to being contagious, to spreading the virus, but it's understandable that many parents are concerned anyway. The idea is that by September, the deaths have declined to a point where it's manageable to go back to school. The famous R rate has gone down, of course. But naturally, there are also concerns that there may be a second wave. That's only natural, of course. Mm. The idea is that when children do go back to school, it's done under stringent hygienic measures, that social distancing is followed, the idea that they'll have bubbles just to ensure safety. And it's also been pointed out this is going to be mandatory, and those who refuse to send their children to school could be facing some fines, which has also been, of course, quite controversial.
Mm. It's sobering. There's a lot to think about, but I believe that there is also a £1 billion fund that's been announced recently, a catch-up fund made available specifically to schools for tutoring to support learners who need extra help with catching up. John, tell us a little bit more about this, and how is Bright Heart Education able to help?
Of course. First, let's do the breakdown. 650 million have been allotted to state schools with the idea of lifting the educational outcomes. And it will be left to head teachers to decide how they will be spending that money. But the idea is that tutoring will take place with small groups. And the idea is also that a quarter of that money will be spent to help those who need it the most vulnerable students, to try and catch up. It's that attainment gap that we were talking about a little earlier. Then specifically 350 million have been allotted to the most disadvantaged to ensure that this attainment gap can be narrowed. Now, added to that, the Department for Education has also invested more than 100 million to provide laptops and internet access to students who currently don't have it. We were pointing out a little earlier that almost a quarter of the students don't even have the means to access remote learning in the first place. In that case, the impact has been devastating. It should be pointed out also that colleges for 16 to 19-year-olds have not been included. It's state primary and secondary schools that they're included, and that has been pointed out by critics. Critics have also said that it's really not going to help the most disadvantaged children. This is not going to mitigate it enough because the damage has already been done. Now, we would be naturally perfectly willing to help as a tutoring agency. We would love to help children throughout London, especially those who have special needs, because that's what we specialize in, regardless of the special needs. We hire only experienced tutors who are very knowledgeable of the curriculum for all age groups, and who have the patient and nurturing approach to be able to connect with children with SEN, especially, but with the student population in general. All our tutors are also fully vetted. It's very important to point that out. But I feel the most crucial aspect of our agency is that all our tutors share a special ethos, a holistic approach that seeks to understand both emotional and academic considerations in order to ensure better learning outcomes. And this goes hand in hand with what medical professionals have expressed regarding the mental health of students during this lockdown and how it has been quite affected during this period.
I'm glad you mentioned that, John, because we have a question this evening from a very experienced tutor, Paul, who says there is a lot of talk about the emotional impact of COVID on pupils. On the other hand, there is a lot of curriculum to catch up on. So can we just pick up where we left off and just get cracking? Or should we be more cautious? If we push on and get everything done, will it be retained, do you think? Could you possibly weigh in on that for us, John?
Of course. Paul has made a very interesting point. It is true that mental health, emotional aspects have been mentioned consistently, but it is also true that there are great concerns amongst everyone really to have students catch up with the curriculum. This is not going to be an easy task, I'm afraid. I'm sure Paul is perfectly aware that it will vary greatly from one individual to the other. All experienced teachers know that. But predictably, we will have to slow down and we will have to review, we will have to set priorities as to teaching the most essential concepts. We'll have to focus on the most essential learning targets. And I feel that children are going to be a little bit rusty after being away from school for so long. They're also going to be a little uneasy given their experiences. So it will take some time for them to readapt to school in the first place. Now, this is a concern shared by many people. I'll give you an example. I read, I'm not sure if it was a day or two ago, but many head teachers in the country, I think it was something like 5,000 head teachers, are warning that the government's plan to have everything back to normal in terms of covering the curriculum by summer of next year, I believe the exact words they used were that this is neither realistic nor workable. In other words, they feel that schools will not be able to bridge that gap so quickly after the effects of the lockdown on children. And given the figures that I pointed out a little earlier on in terms of the educational outcomes, there has been clearly a lack of educational outcomes given, and that's what the surveys are telling us very, very clearly. And they have said that this reaches a point where they even believe that GCSEs and A-levels should be slimmed down in terms of the content. We're talking about the exams should be slimmed down in terms of the content because of all the time lost during the lockdown. They are even suggesting that exams must be open book, that students should be able to use textbooks in order to be able to make this attainable in some way. And I must say, I do agree with the views of these heads of school.
There is a great deal to think about. And if you had to take the holistic picture and give parents advice on the way forward right now, what would it be and why?
I think the most important thing is not to be over anxious about children falling behind, our children falling behind. Naturally, we have concerns. I have pointed out the impact of lockdown. I would say education needs to be maintained during the summer break. And students should get some exposure to it with the help of their parents, who have had to improvise skills as teachers. But even though we want to keep children engaged, we don't want to worry about covering too much of the work that has not been covered before. It's not going to happen. It's only going to increase stress levels. I would say provide the support, but focus on the basics. Not the content has to be covered. I would say prioritize what you feel is the most important. And that goes, by the way, in line with what the government is saying. They're also saying that we need to prioritize, that we are going to be flexible. We need to be flexible. But also, I would say spending quality time to strengthen family ties, playing games, going out for walks is going to be important for children's mental health. Now, prior to going back to school in September, I would say it would be good to prepare children with the idea that they will have to follow changes at school, but it's for their safety. We do have concerns. Everyone has concerns about this, of course, but we don't want to make children nervous about it. That won't do any good. And all children will take it differently. We know our own children better than anyone else, so we know how to approach this with them. But while some are looking forward to going back to school because they just want to see their friends again, others are worried about resuming the social interaction. It's a reality we have to acknowledge. And for example, for parents who have children with ASC, it would be important, for example, to prepare them through social stories, to explain the situation, prepare them for that change that is upcoming.
Thank you very much for that feedback. And, listening to you this evening has definitely highlighted how much there is to consider, but also your level of expertise and experience, which is really very valuable. What do I need to do as a parent if I'd like a free trial lesson with yourself or one of the Bright Heart tutors? Where do I get more information about online learning now during lockdown, and more information about the benefits of tutoring? How can you assist? Where should I go from here, John?
We want to help, and we are available during the summer, of course. We want to help parents who are concerned about their children falling behind. In fact, we've had many calls as of late with that idea in mind, the idea that they need their children to become engaged again, to be interested in reading, writing, numeracy, the idea that they don't want their children to fall behind because they're concerned after so long not going to school. We would love to do that. Get in touch with us. Give us a phone call, send us an email, just a text via chat, no problem. Phone call would be preferable because we would give you a free consultation. We would listen to your child's needs, your child-specific needs, and we offer bespoke tutoring. We look for a good match for those needs, and we offer a trial session, a free trial session, which in the vast majority of cases works very nicely. And we believe that we have the warm and nurturing approach that it takes to combine both the need to help children emotionally and academically in one. And that's what we would help parents with, and we would explain the whole process in a consultation. We'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, John. Once again, your insight and your experience has proven very valuable, and we look forward to having you chat with us again in the future as the Facebook community here and on YouTube and across other social media channels for Bright Heart Education continues to grow. To those of you who tuned in and watched this evening, thank you very much for your time. We are glad that you have joined us, and we encourage you to please post your comments, any questions that you might have in the comment section below these video clips. You're welcome to engage with us. We hope you found value in this evening's interview, and if so, you're also welcome and invited to share this content. Keep an eye on our pages for for future Facebook and YouTube Live communication from the team at Bright Heart Education. Until then, stay well, stay safe, and best wishes from all of us at Bright Heart Education.
Thank you so much, Jackie. It has been my pleasure.
Thanks, John. Good night.
Good night.